In the heart of downtown, wrapped in the golden arms of skyscrapers and neon-lit wealth, stood the Lafayette Regent Hotel. Its crown jewel, a luxury bar on the 32nd floor, known as the Velvet Glass. The name was no accident. With deep crimson walls, velvet seating, mahogany counters, and glasses so polished they shimmered like gemstones under the dim gold chandeliers, the Velvet Glass didn't just serve drinks, it served status. Here you didn't just order a cocktail. You announced your net worth with a martini. You didn't sip champagne. You auditioned for admiration. A soft jazz trio, crooned from a stage near the corner, barely audible beneath the hushed murmurs of people making business deals, networking, over charcuterie boards, or laughing in that manufactured way rich people often do, like they want the sound to bounce off their Rolexes. Everything was curated. Even the clientele. This wasn't a place you stumbled into. You had to belong. And tonight every eye in the room made sure of that. Have you ever been judged by someone who didn't know your worth? What if they were about to be exposed, in front of everyone? Marcus Delane. He entered the bar without fanfare. No entourage. No flashy jewelry. No designer labels screaming for attention. Just a simple navy suit, crisp white shirt, and a calm aura that somehow silenced the noise around him. Marcus was in his early 30s. Sharp eyes, clean-cut beard, posture that spoke of confidence, but not arrogance. The kind of man who knew who he was, and didn't need to prove it to anyone. What no one in that room knew was that Marcus owned it. The hotel, the bar, the floors they stood on. Every thread in the upholstery, every crystal in the chandelier, it all belonged to Marcus Delane. A self-made tech billionaire, born and raised in the very neighborhoods this hotel looked down on, literally and figuratively. He had built his fortune, not on flash, but on brilliance. He'd funded apps that now powered half the city's infrastructure. But if you asked him what he did for a living, he'd probably just say, tech consulting, and let people believe what they wanted. He valued silence over spectacle, and tonight he wanted nothing more than a quiet drink, alone. Crystal Langston Crystal had just started working at the Velvet Glass 2 weeks ago. 26, white, pretty, and very aware of it. Her blonde hair was tied back in a perfectly curated bun, not a strand out of place. Her makeup, flawless. Her uniform, ironed within an inch of its life. Crystal didn't just work at the bar, she performed at it. She came from a comfortable middle-class background, but carried herself like someone who believed she was just one rich husband away from being a reality TV star. She didn't just serve guests, she judged them. To her, money had a look, success had a face, and power wore Prada. So when Marcus sat down at one of her tables without the look, Crystal's carefully crafted performance began to slip. Rick Nolan. Then there was Rick, the manager. Late 40s, salt and pepper hair, and a smile that never reached his eyes. He had a way of speaking that always sounded agreeable, but somehow left a sour taste. Rick liked things a certain way. He expected his staff to look presentable, his guests to look the part, and the whole operation to run like a clock made of gold. He wasn't overtly racist, or sexist, or classist. He just had expectations. Marcus took a seat near the bar, quietly ordering a glass of neat bourbon. No commotion, no arrogance. Crystal noticed him instantly, and not for the right reasons. Her eyes narrowed, calculating. He didn't look like he belonged in this world of tailored suits and trust funds. No visible brand logos, no silver cufflinks, no sign of being someone important. He looked out of place, so she made him feel that way. She didn't greet him right away. Instead, she lingered with a couple seated by the window, laughing just a little louder than necessary. When she finally approached Marcus, her tone was clipped, her words dry as stale toast. "Yes?" she asked, already checking her tablet. "Do you have a reservation?" Marcus smiled patiently. "No need, just here for a quiet drink." Her eyes flicked to his shoes. Clean, polished, but not luxury. She gave a tight-lipped smile. "We usually reserve these seats for hotel guests or members." "I'm both," Marcus replied calmly. She blinked, caught off guard, then leaned in slightly as if trying to sniff out a lie. Finally she scribbled on her notepad, and walked off with a dismissive, "I'll be right back." But even that sounded like a judgment. Why do some people assume power only comes dressed in designer suits? As Marcus waited, Crystal approached another waitress, whispering behind cupped hands and giggles. "Did you see that guy over by the bar? He must have wandered in from the street. Thought he could just sit there like this was Applebee's." The other waitress gave a small laugh, but said nothing. Rick passed by a moment later, catching a glimpse of the scene. He leaned in toward Crystal. "Everything good?" he asked, motioning subtly toward Marcus. Crystal rolled her eyes. "He says he's a guest." Rick chuckled. "Well, keep it light. No drama. Just watch him, all right." Crystal nodded, smirking. "Always do." Marcus, meanwhile, sat quietly, sipping his bourbon, now that it had finally arrived, after a generous delay. He had noticed the stares, the whispers. He always did, but tonight he wasn't in a hurry to correct them. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is let people show you who they really are. As the jazz music swelled, and the bar carried on with its carefully orchestrated elegance, Marcus glanced up from his drink, catching Crystal's gaze for the briefest second. Her face turned stone cold before looking away. Rick strolled by again, offering Marcus a corporate smile. "Everything all right, sir?" Marcus nodded slowly. "Perfect, actually." But behind that calm smile, something stirred. Not anger, not ego, something far more unsettling. Memory. Because Marcus had once been invisible to places like this. And tonight, he didn't come just for a drink. But what neither Crystal nor Rick knew was that Marcus wasn't just a guest. He was their boss, and he had just taken note of everything. Marcus Delane didn't need a spotlight to command a room. He carried an unshakable calm, a quiet certainty that made noise irrelevant. He sipped the drink Crystal had just served him. It was a Manhattan, or at least, it was supposed to be. One taste and his brow raised ever so slightly. Too sweet. Wrong ratio, and she'd garnished it with a lemon peel, on a Manhattan. But he said nothing. Instead he looked around, taking in the scene as if it were a performance, and in many ways it was. At a nearby table, Crystal floated effortlessly from guest to guest, her smile bright, her body language loose and flirtatious. The men in tailored suits, investment types, maybe hedge fund guys, laughed too loudly at things she said, tipping generously after nothing more than her presence. She returned to their table 5 times in 10 minutes. Each time, she greeted them by name, adjusted her blouse ever so slightly, and spoke with the kind of reverence people usually reserved for royalty. But when she returned to Marcus, the smile vanished. Her tone went cold. The way she placed his drink on the table, not gently, not even rudely, but indifferently, like she was serving an inconvenience, not a customer. When Marcus asked, gently, "Excuse me, could I have this stirred instead of shaken next time?" she responded with a sigh. "You didn't specify," she said flatly. "Next time be clearer." He nodded once. Still no complaint, just observation. Is it really just bad service, or something far worse under the surface? In the back corridor, behind the bar, Crystal leaned against the wall with her phone in hand, texting furiously. Heard back from Jason. Said he's talking to the GM at the rooftop lounge. Might get me a spot up there next week. The rooftop club, Vanta, was the crown jewel of the hotel. High rollers, celebrities, city elites. Crystal had been trying to get a position there for months. She looked up and whispered to a fellow waitress. "If I land Vanta, I'm out of this velvet tomb. Real money, real people." Her friend raised an eyebrow. "What about that guy by the bar?" Crystal rolled her eyes. "Oh please. Dressed like he walked in off the street. Probably here for warmth. But didn't he pay with a black Amex? Fake. Gotta be. Probably borrowed. I swear, some people know how to act rich, but not be rich." She turned back to her phone, checking for more updates from Jason. She didn't know much about him, just that he drove a Porsche, wore expensive watches, and always paid in cash. To her, that spelled money. That spelled escape. What she didn't know, Jason was already on thin ice with security upstairs. And the man she was dismissing might have had the power to hire, or end careers with a phone call. She thought she was moving up. She was actually digging down. Marcus's story. There was a photo in Marcus's private office, framed in dark walnut, simple and timeless. It was of his mother, wearing a faded hotel-maid uniform, smiling as she held a young Marcus outside a service entrance. She'd just finished a double shift. Her hands were raw, her back hurt, but her eyes gleamed with pride. Marcus had been 12. That photo never left his desk. He'd gone on to study computer engineering on a full scholarship, built his first app in his dorm room, a language learning platform that got picked up by an educational software firm. From there it snowballed, funding rounds, international contracts, strategic mergers. By 30, he'd sold one of his companies to a Fortune 100 firm, and cashed out with more money than he could spend in 3 lifetimes. But it wasn't about spending, it was about meaning. He bought the hotel not for profit, but to reclaim history. His mother had cleaned floors in places like this. He would now own the floors. He ran it differently, quietly, disguised in plain sight. That's why he came tonight, unannounced, unaccompanied, in an outfit deliberately unassuming, to see how people treated the unseen. Crystal's story. Crystal Langston had always felt 2 steps behind. Raised in a suburb where people had just enough, her parents worked retail and taught her the gospel of better days ahead. But Crystal didn't want better, she wanted elite. She studied fashion magazines the way some studied scripture, saved paychecks for heels she couldn't walk in, took side gigs just to buy a bag she couldn't pronounce. In college, she'd studied communications, but dropped out sophomore year, said she was too ambitious for the classroom. Her real education, she claimed, came from watching Who Wins. The problem was, she never looked deeper. She mistook noise for power, glitter for gold, confidence for substance. And now, in a bar owned by a man who wore humility like armor, she was playing with matches in a room full of gasoline. As Marcus overheard her telling a guest, "Honestly, the rich just have this energy. You can always tell who's worth something." He smiled softly, and said to the man beside him, "Maybe the people who look ordinary are the ones worth listening to." Ever made that mistake? On his 3rd drink, this time ordered directly from the bar, Marcus struck up a casual chat with Crystal. "So tell me, what do you think of the guy who owns this place?" Crystal, pouring a soda for another table, snorted. "Him? Never met him. Probably some crusty old guy with a trust fund and 0 taste. Honestly, if I were in charge, I'd redecorate this place in a second." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Is that so?" She shrugged. "These velvet chairs, so last decade. The piano guy, makes me feel like I'm in a nursing home." He chuckled softly. "What would you do differently?" "I'd bring in a DJ, LED walls, raise drink prices, make it exclusive, not just expensive. That's what people want now." He nodded. "Interesting. You ever meet the owner?" "Please, he's probably never even stepped foot in here. Guys like that live on yachts. This place is just a tax write-off." Marcus sipped his corrected Manhattan, now perfectly stirred, and looked her in the eye. "You think so?" Before she could respond, Rick, the manager, approached. "Marcus, right. Just wanted to say we appreciate your visit. If you need anything, let me know." Crystal looked stunned. He knew his name. Marcus smiled. "Thanks, Rick. Actually, I've been meaning to ask, how do you decide who gets promoted to Vanta?" Rick blinked. "Well, typically that comes from upper." Marcus cut in. "Good to know." He turned to Crystal. "You ever been up there?" "Not yet," she replied, suddenly softer. "But, I'm hoping." Marcus finished his drink, stood, and adjusted the sleeve of his watch, a vintage Patek Philippe, understated but worth more than Crystal's car. He dropped a card on the bar, black, gold-lettered, no name, just a symbol. Crystal's eyes widened. It was the private crest of the hotel's ownership group. But the time for hints was coming to an end. Soon, the mask would fall, and Crystal's world would never look the same again. The night had reached that strange tipping point, where the hum of casual conversation started to fray. Marcus had been sitting quietly at the far end of the bar for nearly an hour. Still, Crystal found herself annoyed by the very sight of him. She'd convinced herself he was lingering on purpose. She walked over with a practiced tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you not to take up this seat any longer. Some of our other guests are beginning to feel uncomfortable." The words fell like ice into the warm buzz of the room. Nearby patrons paused mid-sip, eyes darting toward the commotion. Marcus blinked, slow and calm. "Uncomfortable? You've been here a while," she continued, her voice rising slightly. "And honestly, you've made a few of our higher-tier clients nervous." He looked around. No one was frowning. If anything, they looked confused. "I just asked for another water." Crystal crossed her arms. "And I said I'm cutting you off. I'll call security if I have to." At that moment, Rick appeared behind her like a loyal shadow. "Is there a problem here, Crystal?" "Yes," she snapped. "He's lingering, refusing to leave." Rick turned to Marcus, all smug confidence. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to close your tab and move along." Marcus remained seated, still, poised. "When people show you who they are, do you believe them, or wait until they hurt someone?" He reached into his blazer and casually pulled out his phone. A few rapid taps. He didn't raise his voice, didn't yell. But 3 minutes later, the bar doors opened, and the general manager, Pamela Reyes, all but sprinted inside. She spotted Marcus immediately and looked horrified. "Mr. Delane, I didn't know you were here tonight. You should have told us." Crystal frowned. "Wait, what?" Rick's arms slowly lowered from his chest. Pamela turned to Crystal and Rick, eyes wide. "Do you two know who you've been speaking to?" Marcus stood, calm, unbothered. "I'm Marcus Delane," he said, voice steady. "I own this bar, and the hotel, and this isn't the first time I've seen this happen." The room went dead silent. One woman at a nearby table gasped audibly. A couple sipping cocktails pulled out their phones to discreetly record. Rick's face drained of color. Crystal stood frozen, mouth slightly open. Marcus turned to the small group of patrons who'd been watching. "I came here tonight to observe, to listen, and to understand how people are really treated here." His gaze landed on Crystal. "I've seen enough." Crystal's voice cracked as she stepped forward, suddenly smiling too much, eyes wide with panic. "Mr. Delane, I had no idea. I thought you were just—" He raised a hand. "Just what?" No, I mean I didn't mean to treat you any differently. It was a misunderstanding." He leaned forward slightly. "Was it a misunderstanding, or a mindset?" You could feel the weight of the question in the air. Someone in the back muttered, "Damn." Marcus turned to the crowd. "This isn't just about me. It's about the way anyone could be treated when people judge based on appearance, assumptions or bias." He walked behind the bar, typed in a quick command on a tablet. "Effective immediately," he said. "This location, and all locations under my ownership, will implement new inclusion training and anonymous feedback protocols. Staff will be retrained, and everyone, no matter who they are, will be treated with dignity. No one should ever feel less than because of how they look. If you agree, don't stay silent. Speak up." Crystal's hands trembled as she tried to backpedal. "I was just trying to do my job." Pamela, the GM, stepped in. "We'll need to speak in private, Crystal." Marcus gave her one last look. Not angry, just tired. "Be honest with yourself. This isn't about your job. It's about who you chose to be in it." Crystal looked away. For the first time that night, her confidence was gone. But Marcus wasn't done. He turned to the guests once more. "I don't want to be the guy in the suit no one recognizes. I want to be the guy who changes what that suit represents. Respect doesn't start with a paycheck. It starts with how we treat each other when we think no one's watching." The crowd broke into applause. And still, Crystal stood silent, exposed. Crystal thought it was over. But the real lesson had just begun, and it wasn't about losing a job. It was about facing herself. The next morning came with an eerie stillness at the hotel. Word had spread. The video of the incident had already circulated online, gaining traction under hashtags like #seen and respected and #Marcus Delane moment. Some praised Marcus for his restraint. Others were stunned at how calm he had been in the face of such casual dismissal. But nearly everyone agreed. Something had to change. Pamela, the general manager, gathered the staff that morning with a new tone, serious but hopeful. Crystal was suspended. Not fired. Yet. Marcus wanted to leave the door open, not slam it shut. Rick was demoted to a non-supervisory role. It stung his pride. But unlike Crystal, he didn't protest. Deep down, he'd known something had been off in his behavior for a long time. That week, the hotel's conference room was transformed into a safe, open space for something it had never held before, a real conversation. And this time, the diversity and inclusion training wasn't led by a third-party consultant with a slide deck. It was led by Marcus himself. He stood in front of every employee, concierge, kitchen staff, cleaners, valets. No podium, no flash, just him. And he spoke about what it feels like to be invisible, to be misjudged, to be someone whose story was never asked, only assumed. He didn't need a script. He just needed the truth. Later that week, A soft knock came at Marcus's office door. Crystal stepped in. No makeup, no mask, no forced smile, just her. "I don't expect forgiveness," she began, her voice low, "but I needed to say something, and I didn't want to send it in an email." Marcus motioned to the chair across from him. She sat, hands folded, eyes damp, but steady. "I judged you," she said, "not just that night, but probably long before. I didn't even realize how automatic it's become, assuming what someone is worth by how they look, by what they're wearing, whether they belong." Marcus let her speak. "I've spent my whole life trying to climb some ladder, impress the right people, say the right things. I guess somewhere along the way, I forgot how to actually see people, really see them." She paused. "I chased the wrong things, image, status, attention, and it made me blind." Marcus finally spoke, his voice calm. "You're not the first, and you won't be the last." He leaned forward slightly. "Everyone messes up. What matters is what you do next. Would you have the courage to own up to your worst moment, if the whole world saw it?" Crystal nodded, tears finally spilling over. "I'm trying," she whispered. "I want to do better. I will do better." Marcus didn't offer a free pass, but he offered something better, a moment of grace. "Start with one person," he said. "Make them feel seen. Then do it again tomorrow. That's how you change the world." She left the office quieter, but lighter, a woman beginning again. A week later, every staff member gathered for an all-hands meeting, mandatory, but not tense. There was a strange electricity in the room, a shift in energy. People weren't just waiting for another HR presentation. They were waiting for him. Marcus stepped onto the low platform and looked across the sea of faces. Some he'd seen before, most he hadn't. He took a breath. "I want to tell you about my mother," he began. "She cleaned hotels. For most of her life, actually. She never complained. She worked double shifts, weekends, holidays, and not once did she ever check into the kinds of places she scrubbed spotless. Not because she didn't want to, because she wasn't welcome. You could hear a pin drop. There was one hotel, back when I was little, she used to come home quiet, after shifts there, quieter than usual. I asked her once why. She said, 'They make me walk in the back door. I'm not allowed through the front.'" Gasps rippled through the room. She didn't make a fuss. She just kept showing up, kept working hard. "So when I bought my first hotel, I put a plaque in the lobby with her name on it. And the second, I made sure the cleaning staff could eat lunch in the same lounge as the executive team." He smiled faintly. "My success isn't just for me. It's a tribute to people like her. People who were never given a title, but deserved every bit of respect." He scanned the room slowly. "Titles don't define worth. Uniforms don't measure value. And kindness." He paused again. "Kindness outlives everything. If you believe kindness matters more than titles, share this message. Let someone else feel seen today." A standing ovation erupted, not out of obligation, not for show. It came from a place of truth, of clarity, from people who had felt, even for a moment, what it was like to be reminded of their worth. As the crowd dispersed, and the hotel slowly returned to business, the atmosphere was different, lighter, more human. No one could unsee what had happened. But maybe that was the point, because sometimes, what we need most isn't to be corrected, it's to be seen, and then challenged to rise. The seasons shifted, months passed, but what happened in that hotel bar echoed far beyond a single night. Crystal didn't return to her old position. She didn't want to. Instead, she found herself in a place she never imagined, leading workshops at a local youth program, helping teenagers from underserved neighborhoods learn about emotional intelligence, leadership, and what it means to show up for others. She didn't pretend to be perfect. In fact, she often opened her sessions by telling her story, the story of a woman who once looked right through people, and what it took to start seeing them. The kids listened, they related, and slowly, Crystal discovered something she'd never chased before: purpose. Meanwhile, Marcus didn't slow down. His presence at the hotel was more visible than ever. But he wasn't just running a business, he was building a mission. Hiring policies changed, training wasn't just required, it was reimagined, and he began a new initiative, quietly but powerfully, mentoring at-risk youth with potential no one had ever recognized, giving them internships, coaching them through resumes, sitting down for coffee and talking to them like they mattered, because they did. Every week, A new face walked into the lobby that once ignored them, and every week, someone walked out with more hope than they walked in with. This wasn't just hospitality, it was healing. As the camera pans across the hotel lobby, now alive with faces of every shade, every background, every walk of life, we hear Marcus's voice one last time. Sometimes, life gives you the chance to rewrite your story, but only if you're brave enough to read the page you're already on. There's no grand applause, no news crew, just the quiet revolution of hearts being opened, and people finally being seen. Have you ever judged, or been judged, too quickly? Tell your story in the comments. You never know who you'll inspire.